Welcome to the Politics in the Pulpit podcast, brought to you by the Jacob Public Issues team. And we're here for a new series. And my name is Matt Forsyth, and I'll be your host for that series. And it's exciting to be here once again. But this podcast series, of course, is a lectionary-based preaching podcast that reflects on topics of politics and how we can weave that into our preaching and looks at what the lectionary readings have to offer us in wisdom and nuggets of justice as well. Thankfully, for this series, I won't be alone, and I've got good friends from Joint Public Issues team joining me, but also some special guests too. Today's special guest is Jacob Dimitriou, who joins us from Housing Justice, and then we have Roo Stewart. But welcome, Jacob, to the podcast. How are you keeping?
Thanks very much for having me. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Fab, and welcome Roo Stewart as well to the podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. Good to be here.
Fab, and it's good to have you both. And we don't want to assume people know you, but no doubt they hopefully would have heard of you or heard of your organisation. But in terms of housing justice, Jacob, so talk to us firstly a little bit about your role and maybe a little bit of your backstory as to how you found yourself working for housing justice and being a director for England in that wonderful organisation.
Sure. So, Housing Justice is a Christian ethos housing and homelessness charity, an amalgamation of lots of other Christian uh, responses to homelessness. And there's kind of four broad pillars to our work. We're the membership body for church and community night shelters across England and Wales. We run a hosting and lodging project in London and parts of Wales. We work with churches to build affordable housing on land that is either vacant or redundant, or occasionally churches themselves that are going to be deconsecrated. And rather than being sold off to the highest bidder, we work with churches, and actually particularly with Methodists and colleagues across denominations to turn those projects into hopefully affordable housing in perpetuity. And then fourth, a kind of newer project for us, we work with communities across England and Wales to provide kind of ongoing support to people who have moved on, they're further along in their journey away from homelessness, but maybe they're in their first or second place and they need some of that kind of relational community support. But frankly, we do, churches I think do really well. So we wrap some of that support around folks as well. And obviously, we try and speak into government as well about issues to do with housing and homelessness, of which there are sadly far too many. And I have been doing, so I'm a director for England, and I have been doing this job for about 8 years. I think it's 8 years next month. And I, previous to that, I've worked for a couple of housing charities, and I worked for the Labour Party, what feels like a long time ago now. And it's a privilege to do this job because although there is need, and you see the worst of our country, really, you also see the best of our country and who we are. Your character is tested in times of strife, isn't it? And I spend lots of the winter going out on outreach shifts, speaking to rough sleepers, or in night shelters, speaking to volunteers. And predominantly, I see people who care for each other, want to stand in solidarity with each other, and are super keen to demonstrate God's love through practical and purposeful endeavours. And it's, like I say, a real privilege to work alongside people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jacob. And it's a privilege to have you here on the podcast too. And we hope to glean more of kind of some of your story, how you kind of um, got into this work that you've been doing for, as you said, nearly 8 years, but also to kind of glean a bit more of what Housing for Justice does and how we, as a part of Joint Public Issues kind of community and wider, listen to this podcast in the politics of the pulpit can kind of engage with it too. And I'll allude to it in a moment about what important dates we have coming up for this lectionary Sunday. But Roo Stewart, welcome to you as well, as I said before, from the Joint Public Issues team. But what's your role in the life of the Joint Public Issues team? And tell us kind of a little bit how you yourself, just like Jacob, got into some of the work that you're now doing currently.
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. As I said, yeah, I work for, if you can't tell, it's on my lanyard here. I work for the United Reformed Church, so they pay my bills. And then as part of that role, as head of public issues, part of that is linking in with the Joint Public Issues team, which, of course, all of our listeners and watchers might know is the Methodists, the United Reformed Church, and the Baptists working together, and our associate partners, the Church of Scotland, as well, on issues where that kind of makes sense for us to work together. And I have to say, I really love it. I've always been quite ecumenically minded, having been brought up in a church which wasn't really that keen on other churches. They kind of didn't recommend being part of work with other churches, and then having my eyes opened to seeing the power of God at work in different places, in different spaces, in different ways. And that is just a joy then to be part of the Joint Public Issues team, because we get to see that all the time, and different people from different backgrounds who can come and share, and together we get to experience more of the hope and the joy of God than we ever could have on our own. So really working with the Joint Public Issues team means we can do far more than we ever could have done separately. And certainly within the United Reformed Church, we really appreciate that relationship. It's a really big thing. For me personally, I was a teacher for many years, so it was exciting to see that. I think it's yesterday was World Teachers Day, celebrating that, or actually no, it's coming up this week, isn't it? That's right, on Saturday I think it is World Teachers Day. So if you have teachers in your congregation, it might be a good opportunity to just encourage them and say thank you for all that they bring, whether they're Sunday school teachers or teachers in schools or wherever as well. But in that time, whenever I was in school, I was doing my best for children and trying to help them on their path, on their journey in life. But I kind of realized after a while, there's only so much I can do as a teacher. I do a lot as a teacher, but there's only so much I can do to change the environment in which they are living and in which they are trying to survive. And so that's why I'm with the JPIT, the Joint Public Issues team now, is because we really want to make a difference in society, to change how society is, so that every individual gets the chance to excel and to thrive. So that's why I'm here, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Pleasure to listen to Jacob as well, and everything that you're doing with Housing Justice. It's really inspiring and really encouraging. So I think we're going to have a great chat.
I think we will. Thank you, Roo. It's great to hear your story, and as you say, give some teachers some love. I always wonder, so often they get all the thanks right at the end, and they've done their role at the end of each academic year. They get all the kind of thanks at that point. But what would it look like to thank them maybe just after the start of term, when they're probably feeling a little bit tired, having to get used to a brand new class? Give them a little bit of care and attention if you can. But we're going to obviously get to the matter at hand, which is talking about politics in the pulpit. That's what we're here for. That's what people are here to listen to, of course, as well. And we're going to reflect on our lectionary readings for this weekend. And it comes from Job 1 to chapter 2, then verses 1 to 10, Hebrews 1, chapter verses 1 to 4, and then chapters 2, verses 5 to 12. And then we're going to head over to Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, verses then 2 to 16, and Psalm 26. Those are our lectionary readings for this weekend, of course, and then there'll be supplementary readings that you can partake in too. But important, as Roo mentioned, there's a couple of key moments in the calendar for us as churches to continue to be aware of, and also, I believe, to weave into our preaching and opportunities of worship gatherings too, however that might look. Of course, we're just finishing the season of creation as well as this goes out, but also this Sunday on the 6th of October, it's Homelessness Sunday. So I'm going to hazard a guess that Housing Justice might have a couple of things to say about that, but we'll get to that in just a moment's time. Of course, it's Good Money Week and Good Money Sunday on the 6th of October too, which I dare say also has links to Homelessness Sunday as we reflect on what it means for Good Money Week as well. Of course, we've started the month of Black History Month, International Non-Day of Violence has just happened. And as Roo said, we got World Teacher Day on the 5th of October. So give teachers a little bit of love wherever you might be. But before we get to those lectionary readings and maybe some of those dates we want to mention, Jake, I want to come to you and ask a question about politics in the pulpit. What's your response when you hear the argument that politics has no place in our pulpit? And I guess, especially given your context, having worked in a political party, what would you then say as a response when you hear people say politics has no place in our pulpit? What would you say to that?
I should probably declare an interest. Actually, I'm also the treasurer of Christians on the Left, and have been for a while. And my response to that is that first of all, that's a very modern invention. Uh, the pulpit has been political since there has been a pulpit, and
Mm.
before there was one. Jesus was overtly political, um, and actually, most faiths, not just our own, are political, and they should be political. And I think the message of Jesus Christ is one of justice, and one where one that encourages us to be a prophetic voice into the society we live in, and the one that we want to bring about, which is the kingdom. And that does require some politics sometimes. And I think actually some of what it's interesting, because I have this kind of perennial discussion. I was having it with somebody the other night. I have to say as well, I've just gone back from Labour Party conference, where we've been doing some events. We sponsored a church service there and stuff. And I often have a conversation with homeless charities who are edging away from their Christianity or their kind of Christian ethos. And there's always a conversation there about, should we be more Christian? Should we be less Christian? And I actually think the direct kind of parallel of that conversation in the church is, should the church be less political? Should they, and I mean the small C church, should we speak out on this? Should we speak out on that? And my that politics and the church should be intertwined, and they always have been, particularly the Christian socialism in the UK has been a rich tradition, which I would argue has brought some of the greatest social reforms in our country's history. I also live in the East End of London, and it is completely impossible to tell anybody in the East End of London that you shouldn't be political and be a Christian. And frankly, often that you shouldn't be of another faith and be political. In areas where, try going to a church on a council estate and telling the preacher or the priest that you shouldn't talk about politics. Try talking to people in poverty about why they shouldn't be political. It just doesn't wash, and we should, I think, always have appropriate parameters around what is being said in a political sphere. But it is absolutely incumbent on us, I believe, as Christians, to be political and to push for justice.
Absolutely, that's really helpful. And I'm gonna just slip in a quick question before we go into our lecture reading, because you did just mention you're coming off the Labour Party conference, of course, that was in Liverpool. What was your experience? Having been a part of things in 2015, of course, now being a part of Housing Justice for some time and being there. What's the key takeaway you're taking away from that conference for Housing Justice, for example? What's that takeaway at the moment, hot off the press, would you say, for you?
Um, well, look, I've been speaking freely and frankly, I prefer the conference in 2024 to the one in 2015 where the Labour Party had lost the general election. But
Mm.
I think there is, I agree with a lot of the media commentary that it was probably a flatter conference than you might expect for a party that's back in government. I think the Labour Party's got an absolutely huge job to do, not just to sort out the country, but actually probably to be clear about exactly what its vision is for the country. And that's, I think, probably what some of the, kind of anxiety I hear when I was in the pub the other night and people talking about some of their kind of gripes already with the government, which is what, kind of less than 3 months old.
Mm.
Um, I also think, speaking from a faith perspective, I think Labour did quite a good job in engaging faith and community groups and churches in the run up to the election. That relationship is going to look different now that the Labour Party is in government, and I am interested to see how that relationship develops over the next few years. I think that particularly in the fiscal environment we're in, where it's going to be hard to raise taxes and spend loads of money, there's going to have to be a really close relationship actually between churches and the social action projects they run and the state, and that is going to require some deep thinking, frankly, on both sides, because I think we've got to be careful as churches and as civil society not to do the government's job for them, where there is a statutory requirement to do that. So I think there's lots of there's still some goodwill to this government, for this government. Obviously, everybody is waiting until the budget on the 30th of October, and it's still early days. But they've got to set out a vision. They've got to tell people, I'm sure everybody on the tip of their tongue has, without a vision, the people perish. Like we do need to hear something of like where the government is going and how, if it is to be a program of national renewal, you do that together as a country. You need to bring people with you.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we wait, don't we, of course, then for anticipation at the end of this month, what will be. But like you said, that partnership that was happening before the election, of course, now afterwards look different now we have a different government that's been formed. And of course, we continue to pray for them as a whole government, but also for those leaders that have taken positions too. But I think it's important and it's good to hear as well for us, those listening to and watching, to hear about how Housing Justice and other organisations have been represented and representing themselves and the people, most importantly, that they seek to help and support at places like the Labour Party conference and others that are happening too. Let's go into our lectionary readings. And of course, now we've kind of set the scene, we've set the bar that actually, well, politics can be in the pulpit. So thankfully, we can now go into our lectionary readings, with that kind of bar that's been set. So, friends, where would you begin with these texts? What sort of theme would you go to? Where would you begin? What jumps out at you when you've read them? So, Jacob, I'll go to you, and then we'll hear from you, Roo, kind of what your reflections are. But Jacob, where would you begin with these texts?
I think the first thing I would say is that these are more inconvenient readings than you might wish for Homeless Sunday. I spent over the years, I've spent a long time kind of looking at different verses and readings, kind of trying to crowbar in something about homelessness. To be honest, though, I think the Bible should be, and the Bible is frequently inconvenient for us, and that is where we find the challenge, isn't it? And I suppose my kind of brief initial reflections are actually probably more on the Psalm and the Job reading, and in the I think there's something there about accepting the world as it is, and not the world as we might want it to be, and that is, one of the hardest things about that life, about being a Christian, that you don't get to choose what happens. I believe that that's God's job, and you have to get on with it. And I see that actually very much every day in the work that we're doing, and I know many churches do as well in different settings. So that's my initial kind of thoughts.
Real, thank you, Roo. What jumps out at you? And building on what Jacob said, maybe there as well. What comes to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Job reading, and scholars tell us that it's possibly the oldest book in the Bible, as in, we're not quite sure who wrote it, we're not quite sure where exactly it came from, but it's an ancient text, really, really ancient, and probably the most ancient text we have in Scripture, yet some of the same things that we're dealing with today. Where is God when things go wrong? Who deserves to get bad stuff in life? Here was a man, Job, and it seems like everything's going well for him. He's got high status. He's very wealthy, and yet his life is completely wrecked and turned upside down by terrible, terrible events. And I think it's a real leveler for all of us, isn't it? That this can happen to anyone. Whether people think that someone deserves to end up a certain way or not. That's not what we hear in the book of Job. And so in this passage, you've got this idea from Job, where he responds to his wife in verse 20 or verse 10 of chapter 2, and says, "Shall we receive good from God and not receive evil?" And I just think, sometimes people might think that's quite a jaded view of God. Surely God only gives good things in life, and I certainly want to believe that. But I think it's a mature response in saying that yes, God brings good things, but we shouldn't just expect good stuff in life, that there are difficult circumstances in life. And so that's a great leveler for us. And I was thinking about what Jacob was saying there about just accepting that the world is not a perfect place as it is, and to work from that position of the world is not the way we want it to be, and we have hopes for it as well in life. I was really taken by the Hebrews passage, to go a little bit into the New Testament then, because it obviously refers to this Psalm 8 passage, and it has that verse 8 talking about, 7 is making them a little lower than the angels, crowning them with glory and honor, thinking about humanity, thinking about people. But then it says, as it is, in verse 8, we have not yet seen everything in subjection to them, as in, like, even though it was written in the Psalms that, everything is under our feet, and we very carefully use the word dominion because we don't want to think about humans dominating over the whole of creation. More, we want to think about people caring for it in a very careful way and adding life and bringing that to creation rather than destroying it. But even in that, the writer to the Hebrews is saying, well, actually, when we look around us, things aren't the way that we might have read it in the book of Psalms 8. It's not quite that way. And then he follows it up with, but we do see Jesus. And Jesus has all those things happening. So sometimes I think whenever we get a bit above our station, we become comfortable in ourselves and where we're at, and we think that everything's going well. We do good to remember things don't always go that way, but we can look to Jesus, for whom things do work out that way. He's the one that's crowned with the glory and the honor. So looking to Jesus is much better, I think, for an example of what humanity should be like, not just necessarily looking around us to how things are in the here and now, but we want to respond to the here and now and hope that things become better for people, knowing that they will become better for people. But whether it is a difficult time for them or not, it's not that they deserve it. It's not that it's a punishment from God, but actually this is life, this is real life for people, and how can we respond to that?
It's really helpful. I remember when I was studying theology, and I was the lecturer, the principal, came into the chapel at the first day, and his opening remark was, "No one said this was going to be easy," and it kind of just this that kind of rippled. You just kind of felt the kind of ripples of those words that kind of reverberated around the chapel because, you know, it stuck with me because so often we are told. Or we think, don't we, that as soon as we kind of have this journey of that commitment of faith that we make individually, then all of a sudden life in itself becomes perfect, and there can be no wrong, there can be no kind of bad moments, and they, and we sometimes feel that almost that we get extra defense against all things of evil in the world, like kind of, and we feel like we're in defense. We can't be defeated, can't we? And we can get that kind of approach sometimes and feel that kind of way, but we then realize very quickly we get humbled because life continues in maybe that directory that you'd already started it on, or because of those decisions that you made, for example, prior to that commitment of faith. That actually things aren't always as easy as we might have thought, and that does resonate certainly with that Job read, doesn't it? And but I wonder, how does that resonate particularly? How would you speak about that in the context of Homelessness Sunday, though? So how does that kind of resonate? And I don't know if Jacob, you want to pick up on that first, but how would you kind of that's a difficult message to preach on, isn't it, really, when you think about it, especially on a Homelessness Sunday. So kind of how would you tackle that?
Yeah, it's certainly not one of the easy ones, which has something about not having a home or something in it. But I think the first thing is actually the most obvious thing. For me, the most powerful thing of the Job reading is always the last bit. And I have to say, I use might not be using the same translation as you guys, but
Mm.
my last bit says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. And so for me, there's obviously something about the most powerful thing about it is the faithfulness, is the, uh, in it's for stress testing of faith, isn't it? Actually, as I thought powerfully said just now, uh, baptism isn't a magic wand. It's not that everything for sadly does not go right um, thereafter. And I see all the time talking to people in our hosting project, sometimes who've come from um, faraway countries and experience things that I hope I never have to have the experience of even a tenth of what they've been through. Their faithfulness is so um, so strong, it is almost palpable. And similarly to lots of people who've experienced homelessness, it's not necessarily the fashionable thing to say these days, but lots of people experiencing homelessness have a strong faith. And lots
Mm.
of people experiencing homelessness refined their faith at some point of their journey out of homelessness. And it's that, that gives you um, some spiritual sustenance, because often the material homelessness is primarily a problem of material poverty, but also your emotional and spiritual needs are also you're probably quite emotionally and spiritually depleted when you're at your lowest ebb, and that in itself, that I often think when I'm in a night shelter and I'm having dinner with people, the chat and sometimes frankly the prayer is as powerful as the bed and the food,
Mm.
because it's all contributing to like putting the whole of this person back together, and that faithfulness can really sustain people through what is a very difficult part of somebody's life. But we all have difficult parts of our lives. It's not We don't all experience homelessness, but we all experience difficult things, and we're some of the other readings I think talk a bit about how we are made for community, how we are there to experience these things and weather these things together a little bit.
Be helpful. And I want that brings me kind of, I think to the Mark reading for myself really, because I'll plug it because I know you might want to, but asked me to do it. But the Homelessness Sunday reflections that are offered by Housing Justice, the resources that are out there are brilliant in terms of worship resources. So if you're still at the moment listening to this because you wanted to hear some inspiration about how you might deal with some of these bigger subjects this Sunday, then I really commend you the Housing Justice worship resources that have been put together, and particularly the reflection that's offered, because in the part of the reflection, it goes to verse 15 in chapter 10 of Mark's Gospel, because it says, receive the kingdom like a child. Children trust and then follow. Trusting that Jesus' way is the right way and just way is one thing, and following that way, doing the best we can, sounds simple enough in theory. And then it goes on to ask a good question, and I want to ask and kind of pose something to yourselves. But we have the courage to act, calling the account those who hold believers of power, demanding that they act with us and others to address the spreading stain of homelessness on our society. And so you mentioned the word power just there, Jacob, and I wonder what levers do we have to weather that storm together with people, and what levers of power do you think people listening might begin to have in their context? Maybe just unpack that a little bit for us, Jacob, and ask you, Roo, from your context to speak into that maybe.
Yeah, I think the first is our own personal um, interactions with people experiencing homelessness. I think, to be honest, is our power. Um, how we and I think that one of the things I like about this part of Mark is that it really strangely speaks to a thing I often think, which is that if you try and explain homelessness, and particularly if you try and explain rough sleeping to a kid, my son's 7, and they just don't get it. They just do not understand what they're just, most kids are like, but surely that's mad. Why does somebody else not have a house and we have a house? And obviously over time, you become much more cynical, don't you? And you kind of you doubt the person who's begging off you, all the rest of it. And actually, there is something immensely powerful just in that simplicity of basically of hospitality and of not accepting that it's right that or in any way acceptable that somebody should not have a home. So I suppose the first thing in terms of our own power is how we conduct ourselves in those conversations with people who are experiencing housing need, rough sleeping, homeless, begging. Never, not always are those things the same thing. And I'm not necessarily saying you should give a fiver to every person you meet or any of the rest of it. But I think I suppose what I'm not saying I always achieve this, but I suppose what I try and do is I try and always have a sense of have some integrity in that conversation. So A, I try and have a conversation with somebody, and B, kind of come to some kind of judgment as to what I personally can do in that situation. It might be a variety of things. But the second thing in terms of our own power is that thing I think about not accepting that this is in any way okay. And I have to say, I think we've got to a stage now, we tend to talk more about rough sleeping than we do about general homelessness. But, what has happened, the absolute crisis in general homelessness in this country in the last 5 to 8 years is just remarkable. We've got councils going bust because they can't afford to pay the sums they're paying on people in temporary accommodation because we've basically got a housing market that doesn't work and a group of people who can't access it, and therefore we're paying more and more money to keep them in temporary accommodation. All of this stuff is completely unacceptable, and we've got to be clearer about it just being unacceptable. And I guarantee you, if we are clear about it, politicians listen, and I have to listen because it's a participatory sport, and they require our consent to govern. And I do think the church could, with a small c, all of us in it together, could probably raise our voice a little higher on this stuff. So that's 2. And just the third one is we probably have some of the best church responses to homelessness anywhere in the world. Higher quality, predominantly high quality, well-meaning, effective, arguably more effective than other comparable services. I think the challenge for us is that we are very, very good at the lifeboats. I think when it comes to preventing people becoming homeless in the first place, whether that's through policy change or different types of interventions, we're not as good at that as a church. I'm part of a church. I'm part of a volunteer, and I think that's the challenge, that we've got to get a little bit better at some of that stuff as well, because we can't go on extending night shelters and putting more beds on and more beds on. Otherwise, we're going to get up into a place I don't think anybody else wants to be. Like in some states in America.
Yeah, thank you. Some real good, tangible things that we can get engaged with there. And Roo, I wonder, in hearing what Jacob had to offer there, what's your kind of feelings on some of those levers of power that you think in the context you're in and just generally as well?
Well, one of the phrases that we quite often use now within JPIT, and it really is responding to what Jacob's just said as well, is that classic quote that at one point we need to wonder why we've got all these people falling into the river, and we need to go upstream and find out why. So that phrase is really important for us within JPIT, and I think Jacob has beautifully articulated the fact that our churches are really busy and really involved in trying to support lots of people in our society who experience difficulty. And we just need to celebrate the fact that our churches do an amazing work, and many people of faith contribute so much to society. But at some point we have to think, what is going wrong somewhere else in society that these things keep on happening. The lifeboats are really important and really needed, and God bless them. But we need to
Mm.
sort out the other stuff. Where are the storms coming from? One of the practical ways that we're trying to encourage churches to do that, not trying to labor churches and trying to put too much on them, more projects, more stuff to do, because we know churches are busy doing all that stuff, but is the Constituency Action Network, which is coming from the Joint Public Issues team. And it's an opportunity for churches, all churches with a small c, local churches, to think about how can they engage in a meaningful way with their MP. There's lots of different organisations that churches can be in touch with, of course. There's local councillors and so on as well. Local authorities are also important in lots of the decisions that are made that affect people in local neighbourhoods. But to actually have a meaningful relationship with an MP, which goes beyond the angry letters and the please could you vote in this way, but actually is a relationship which is based on trust, on mutual respect, where people get to know each other, where it's possible to have a conversation, where people can listen, where an MP can really listen to the needs of a neighbourhood. The end goal for us really with this Constituency Action Network is that every local church feels empowered to do this, that they really will celebrate the fact that an MP can listen to them and might even come to the church and say, what do you think about this? You understand the needs of people in your neighbourhood. What are people in your neighbourhood saying about this issue? What could we present at Westminster that might make a difference? And so that's the end goal. It takes a long time to get there, but many churches have already started that journey, are on that way, and some are just looking for help. They just don't even know how to start. So the Constituency Action Network, which you can find more information on our website, jpit.uk/can/can, that's the best place to go, where you can find out how to get really good support and encouragement for how to make that a reality for your local church. Again, we don't say that it's always going to be easy. Some MPs will respond well, some won't. Especially whenever we had the last government, we found there was such an overwhelming majority in Parliament that it was very difficult for votes to go in a particular way that we thought would be better for society. It's even a challenge in our current government, which is a very different government, but again has a huge majority. So actually the voices of local people in local constituencies all across the country are really important. It's important that we get to hear those, not just those who are in government, but also those who are sitting in Parliament all the time, all those MPs who've been elected. It's important that our churches feel that whoever their MP is, that they're being listened to and that their MP is representing them well in government. So that's why the Constituency Action Network came together, to try and make this something which local churches could find, something they could do, and not just another thing on the list of things that they would like to do but don't think that they can have time for it. So that would be maybe a practical suggestion I would give to churches, to really think about what can we do more about this which might make a difference and maybe alleviate some of the suffering which we're seeing in society.
Yeah, thank you. And just commend that, and the link will be it's on the website, as Roo said, and commend that work to you. And just especially as you kind of we're only a few months into this new government, take it as a new uh, government resolution to pick up something, maybe have a go and to build that dialogue or continue that dialogue, possibly in some areas as well. It could be an opportunity for some too. I think just one more thing from me, then I want to just ask one last question to you both, in terms of the text that we've got is, which strikes me in terms of some of the conversation both you, Jacob, and Roo have said already is this just this the intervention, the word kind of came to me in terms of how often, we don't sometimes realize what's happening to those that we engage with, whether they're sitting in a pew or a chair, or that they're having coffee with us, or whether they come into our buildings or not, wherever we might encounter them. How often do we go beyond the normal how are you conversation to drill down deeper into how people are really kind of coping in these times? So often we can assume because how someone might present themselves, or because they might have lived a life of a certain way for so long, but actually that they are still okay. And I think that's something which we've picked up a little bit from the text of saying, the reality of hardship can happen to anyone, and it might, be especially thinking of our Good Money Sunday and Good Money Week, thinking of the financial pressures that the cost of living crisis has brought on individuals, whether they've lost a job potentially, maybe their jobs in danger, or their benefits are being cut, whatever it might be. Are we spending the time out of the pulpit, in the pew, in the chair, and asking the question, "How are you? How are you coping? How are you managing in these times? And what can we do to support?" Yes, it's the part of that lifeboat, but actually, I think sometimes that moves. If we do more of those conversations, it prevents it being the lifeboat moment, and more of kind of uh, enabling people to actually feel supported before they get into a crisis potentially. Do they need to be signposted to a certain course? Do they need to be signposted to certain support? What can we do to help? So, just really encourage people as they're kind of thinking about forming their worship gatherings and what they might be doing this weekend. Are you creating the time for intentional conversations to happen in your communities? Are you creating and curating that space to have that intentional conversation? Because I know I'm in danger so often of walking past someone on a Sunday, walking past someone in the week and going, "How are you?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "How are you?" "I'm good." And moving on in my day and accepting that that's the answer. And sometimes that, if we took a moment, I wonder if it would be. Um, Jacob and Roo, want to hear from both of you lastly. Is there anything else that you want to pick up from these texts? Any challenges, any points you want to make? We've obviously kind of leaned in on the homelessness Sunday reflections. Is there any other things that, point out and stand out for you?
Um, I'd say two things actually. But first thing is more just to jump back 1 second,
Hmm.
and that point about engaging with members of parliament is so important.
Hmm.
Particularly right now. Um, about half the House of Commons, about 300 MPs roughly, have not been MPs or are new MPs, and so the opportunity probably in the next 6 months to get in front of people, to get them into the church, to get them into the night shelter. Like I want, if you listen to this and you run a night show, I would get your MP down ASAP. Think of the Christmas photo shoot you are going to do with them to get them supporting your project. I think it's absolutely crucial. You're going to need, as Rudy says, strong voices in Parliament for your stuff. So that was the first point. But to go back to the text, I think there's also something here about it's a bit, borderline depressing um, passages. But there is also a thing about like bad things happen to good people. Just because you're doing good work doesn't mean that you're immune from feeling down, from bad things happening elsewhere in your life and all of this stuff. So, I think I find quite often in the homeless sector, fantastically committed people, not earning loads of money, doing it through vocation because it's a vocation. Um, it's hard, and it's hard on you emotionally. Sometimes it's hard on you and your family, and you need to find the safety valve somewhere to, let out that some of that pain and hurt and whatever else. And I think that is um, that is, I know, true for church leaders, and for people working with vulnerable people. But I think it's important to remind ourselves of that we all need sometimes to take a moment and to kind of say, actually, this is big stuff, and I need to work it through, hopefully with somebody else, and have a support network around me.
Hmm. Good. Thank you. Roo, anything else for you that stands out too?
Sure. I guess for me, yeah, my overwhelming sense through all of these readings is, and I mentioned at the start about, it's a great leveler, that these things could happen to anyone. But I also have that sense that it's easy for someone who's very privileged to say it's a great leveler.
Hmm.
But for someone who is at rock bottom, who's experiencing the worst times in their life, they don't want to have the encouragement that everyone else could face that too. What they want is for a leg up, a hand up,
Hmm.
opportunity for them to get back to where they think they should be. And so I wonder for us as congregations, how much do we really take that seriously? How much do we see the potential in those that we often write off
Hmm.
as not powerful, not significant in our lives? And of course, none of us would ever dream of using that kind of language, but we kind of express it in the values that we have and the way that we live our lives when we devalue someone because of their current status, whether they are sofa surfing or whether they're a child even. You've got that Psalm 8 verse 2 classic verse, out of the mouths of babes and infants you have founded a bulwark, in the New Revised Standard, which perhaps is a bit confusing for people. Some versions say you've ordained praise, which again is a bit of a stretch, I think, for the word, because it kind of means strength rather than just praise. But this idea of, why would you put this image of babies and infants with this concept of strength? Because they're kind of polar opposites, we think. One is hugely vulnerable. And then you have the gospel, where you've got Jesus inviting children to come and putting the value in the children. And it's that idea of strength that's subversive for Jesus, I think. People were bringing children to Jesus in order he might touch them. The disciples speak sternly to them. And I'm probably just waffling now because I'm from a teaching background. But just this idea of the inherent strength and worth of the people that we often, devalue or don't expect much from. The gems of wisdom that I hear from children, which really just demolish all of the kind of preconceptions that I have about someone. The challenge that comes from their lips, as Jacob was saying, why are people, not having a home? Why are people not in a home when I've got a home? Those are the kind of voices that I want to listen to, because those voices can speak so much strength and they can speak so much challenge to me. So I do wonder, for us in our congregations, are we listening to the voices of people that we often dismiss, whether that's the homeless person that we know lives down the road, has a space down the road where they maybe are looking for money or looking for support. Are we hearing their voice? Are we really, honestly valuing them enough to think, is God ordaining praise through them? Is God ordaining strength through them and through their witness? And being open to the idea that perhaps there's something they could teach us in our respectability or in our wealth or in our position and our status, or whatever position we find ourselves in on a Sunday. Where is the voice? Where is the space for that voice in our society or even in our church? How are we hearing those voices, and what are we doing to respond to those voices?
On that note, I think we should begin to close our podcast and say thank you to Roo and to Jacob, because it is the voices of those that we want to hear. And we're going to be finishing today with a prayer from Steve, who is supported by the Housing Justice Cymru Citadel project. And so we're going to hear Steve's prayer that he's written and to finish up today. But as a reminder, before we close, you've been listening to the Politics in the Pulpit podcast, and I really want to encourage you to go and check out those things that Jacob has mentioned in terms of housing justice and their work, and also the Joint Public Issues team and the contingency network as well, which has been raised throughout this podcast as well. If you've not hit subscribe, you've not hit like, not the little comment, said hello to us, please do so. And wherever you're tuned into this podcast from, we deeply appreciate it, and I hope you can join us again next time as we talk more politics in the pulpit. But let's hear one of those voices that we need to hear today, and that's going to be Steve's prayer as we close. Let me pray for us. Lord, I'd like to pray for the homeless and ask that you send your guardian angels to protect them. Lord, I pray for everyone in the B&B temporary accommodation on the seafront. Keep the vulnerable ones safe and guide them out of their troubles. Guide them away from using drugs and alcohol, and they can finally find peace, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And with that, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Roo. And thank you to all of you that's been listening and watching along to the Politics in the Pulpit. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.